There's an abandoned motel called the Royal Hawaiian Motel. It's been abandoned for, I'm pretty sure, well over a decade. I do a lot of solo urban exploration, sometimes at night. The Royal Hawaiian Motel is located in Baker, California, and during the day it gets scorching hot, too hot to be walking around with my backpack. So I chose to go to the motel during the night. It was very easy to get to. I parked on the side of the road and walked over. There really was no fence or anything to hop over, and there was no security. It was one of the easier structures to get to that I've explored for sure. In the back was a really deep pool with a ton of graffiti. I shined my flashlight up at the actual motel, and I noticed half of the upstairs room's doors were slit open slightly or just completely shattered. Kinda creepy looking, but also expected since the place had been abandoned for so long. Of course, other people have explored there. A part of the motel also looked like it had been engulfed in flames and partially burnt down. I looked around the outside for a little while. It was late at night, so there were no sounds of nearby passing traffic. Besides the sounds of my shoes stepping over various pieces of debris, at one point my blood ran cold when I heard a voice from somewhere in the vicinity. It sounded like a female's voice. My first instinct in these scenarios is to assume it's some kind of security worker or somebody who may cause trouble for me, so I typically tend to walk out of sight and hide. That's what I did. I ran to one of the other rooms on the ground level and turned off my flashlight. I waited just a minute, and after hearing nothing, I turned it back on. I looked around this little room I was in, and the walls were littered with graffiti. There was only one piece of furniture in here. It was a little dresser with like 4 drawers on it, and then some dusty, dirty old mattress on the floor. I wondered if homeless people would come and sleep here, but honestly, it's just so far away from any real civilization that I doubted it. I left the room and continued around the motel. I would peek inside every little opening on the ground floor below the overhead walkway for the upper level rooms. Each room was pretty similar to the last, with different miscellaneous graffiti and writings on the walls and old dilapidated furniture. Then I heard a crash-type sound from above, like something falling over. I felt my heart skip a beat. I went back outside and pointed my flashlight up at the walkway above, at the broken glass doors. I felt a rush as I decided to go up there and check out the rooms. What I felt like deep down was that there was an animal in one of the rooms, but there's always that chance that you run into other explorers or perhaps a homeless person in places like this. I made my way upstairs and peeked into each room that I passed. They were all similarly furnished, with junk, debris, old mattresses, and odd pieces of old furniture. As I walked further down the walkway, a banging sound became audible. It got louder as I continued to walk. It was a consistent, slow banging, like thump, 2 seconds, thump, 2 seconds, thump. Someone was here. I approached the door to the room I was positive that it was coming from. As I got closer, it stopped. Uh-oh, maybe they heard my footsteps. I announced to whoever was in there that I'm just an explorer and I mean no harm. I peeked into the room with the flashlight now off. It was almost pitch black in there, but I'm 50% certain I saw the shape of a person a little further into the room by the back wall. The room smelled like straight feces. I pulled my head out from the room to look down at my flashlight and turn it on, but in a careful position to not point the light right into the room right away. I aimed it down at first at the floor, and then peered into the room again, and slowly pointed the light into the room. And I saw 2 pale bare feet approaching me fast. In a muscle jerk reaction, I pointed the light up more to fully reveal this woman with a bloodied forehead and yellow guck on her mouth, which was hanging open. It was a sight from a nightmare. I was out of there so quick. I heard the woman screaming as I was running away, and her screams didn't get much further away, which told me she was chasing after me. I ran down the stairs and back outside. I ran the entire way back to my car. I wasn't followed this far. I called one of my good friends, George, who's also into urban exploration. I had invited him to come with me originally to this place, but he was unable to. I told him what just happened. We came to a weird and disturbing agreement that the thumping I was hearing was that woman banging her head on the wall, hence why her forehead was so bloody. When I asked if I should call the police, kind of just thinking out loud, he said definitely not, as I'd be admitting to trespassing. I actually drove around the immediate area by the Taco Bell and a few stores in the area, looking for a payphone so I could anonymously call the police about this deranged, dangerous woman. But obviously payphones are really a thing of the past, so it was just a pointless effort. What I ended up doing was calling the non-emergency number and reporting the deranged woman, but also claiming I was not the one to find her. Rather, I heard someone else had run into her. I was as vague as possible, and I hung up. Because I didn't want to stick around there, I don't know if the police eventually went to investigate, but whatever was wrong with that woman, she should have been in a psych ward or something. In all of my years of exploring, I'd never encountered anything like that. A few years ago, I lived in a small town. My family decided to move us 4 hours away to get away from all the drama. While my parents were out of town picking out houses, I brought my friend over and called up my cousins to take a little road trip. The place I wanted to go was pretty much off limits, but we were daredevils and wanted to experience something scary. We picked a place that was 2 to 3 hours away called Bryce Hospital. This place was supposedly haunted due to the history of it. It was a psychiatric facility where they would keep mentally ill people. There were rumors about how some of the patients were mistreated and tortured. As the population declined, they eventually shut down. Over the years, the building began rotting and succumbing to nature. We decided to leave around 11 p.m. so we could make it there by 2 a.m. The car ride was pretty fun, and we were all very pumped to see what we would find. We arrived around like 2:43 a.m. and stopped at the beginning of the dirt road that led to it. We sat there for a few minutes, contemplating if we should really do this or not, because we already had a bad feeling. After 10 minutes of staring at a dark road, we decided to go on. As we went down the road, it felt like it would never end. The grass was fully grown and there were branches everywhere. It was pitch black and we could barely even see the road. We finally made it to the building, and once we did, we all just stared in amazement. It was huge. The roof was rotted off and vines were growing all over the walls. In the middle of the parking lot, or what was once the parking lot, had a giant old water fountain that also had vines growing from the sides. It was so dark we could only see what the headlights illuminated. We turned the car off and got out. We began walking into the building, and the first thing I noticed was pentagrams sprayed all over the walls. We kept walking farther in and made our way up the stairs, which was very hard considering they were practically non-existent. We climbed a ladder and got onto what was left of the roof. We looked around and noticed a light in the front of the building. It looked like a phone light. We called out, but nobody answered, and the light vanished as quickly as it appeared. My cousin told us to follow him into another room so he could make sure we were safe, but I had a terrible feeling. I wandered off into another room that was right beside the room they were in. I looked around and saw old mattresses and more graffiti. I heard my cousins talking when all of a sudden, I heard a faint sound. It was like someone threw a rock at the window of the room I was in. I didn't think anything of it and kept looking around. I met back up with my cousins and friend. We decided to go to the basement to check it out. Once we got down there, we had to take a break because it was difficult getting to the bottom due to the stairs being smashed. We sat there catching our breath until we heard a voice from the back of the room. We all paused, looking at each other. I was too afraid to move, fearing whatever was in there would come after me. My cousin walked back there slowly and shined his light around. As the light reached the far end of the room, he saw someone squatted, looking towards the wall. My cousin began backing up slowly with the light still on the guy. Once he got back to where we were, he lifted us out and began pulling himself out. Once we were out, he yelled to the man, asking if he was okay. The man turned around and stared blankly at us. There was a moment of silence before the man let out wild screams. He began running towards us. We all started screaming and running away. We had no idea where to run, but ended up climbing out of the window. We ended up in the woods behind the building. I remember running and screaming because I heard the man right behind me. My cousins were far ahead of me, and I saw their flashlights slowly fading. I ran into so many trees that my entire body started to ache. I finally caught up to them in a clearing. We found a trail and started trying to find our way back to the car, but we ended up going the wrong direction for an hour and decided to turn back and try the other direction. It was a grueling way back, but we finally saw the building again and sighed with relief knowing we weren't far from the car. As we approached the car, we heard rustling in one of the bushes by the building. And like before, a rock flew out and hit my friend. We saw the man emerge from the bush, and we had to make a run for the car. As we were running, the man was a decent length behind us to where we could open the doors and lock them once we got in. We started up the car, and when we did, the headlights turned on, only to show the man running towards us. He started banging on the windows with a glass bottle. We put it in drive and took off out of there. The whole entire time we were heading home, we sat in silence. I think we all felt the same sense of shock. My body was shaking. After that night, we never had any interest in urban exploring ever again. This happened in the countryside of Georgia. I was 15 at the time with my brother Seb, who was 18. Seb was big on exploring creepy places, and he somehow heard of this huge abandoned house not far from us from someone he knew. I guess he didn't want to explore it alone, so one day he brought me along with him to go check it out. Seb parked the car in a rather hidden location, covered by a bunch of trees. The house property wasn't visible from here. We'd have to walk down this concrete road that clearly hadn't been touched in forever. There were giant cracks with grass and weeds growing through it just about everywhere. All the grass around the road was overgrown, almost overtaken with weeds as well. Suddenly we noticed a woman down the road walking behind us in our direction. I asked Seb what we should do, and he said to just play it cool. If we started to run, it would look suspicious. The woman was walking with both her hands folded behind her back, as if she were going for a relaxing stroll. We kept walking at our regular pace, maybe picking it up a bit, just slightly. I turned around once more, and she was much closer now, and I could see a smile on her face. She was looking back at me. Then she said, "Lovely day today, isn't it?" My brother and I simultaneously responded, "Yeah." She kept walking behind us, getting closer and closer. Then, as she was almost right on top of us, with her hands still folded behind her back, she said, "I have to go to bed now." Seb and I looked at one another with confused looks. We both picked up the pace now without saying a word to each other. We just saw in each other's faces that it was time to speed up and get away from this woman. My brother turned around one last time and said, "Have a great day, ma'am." We stayed in the speed walk pace for a while, and the next time we turned around, that woman was gone, completely off the road. That meant she must have taken off into the woods, which was incredibly creepy. It was absolutely a chilling start to this little field trip. We made it to the house. It was noticeably deteriorated. There were vines of ivy growing up certain parts of the walls. Some of the glass windows were shattered, meaning it had been explored before. And that's exactly how we entered the house, through one of the broken windows. We climbed in, making sure not to cut ourselves on any broken glass. Right from the start, surprisingly, there was a lot of stuff left behind, like all the furniture, albeit it looked a little worn out, all the wall decor, the little decorations on the coffee table. Even when we went into the kitchen and checked the fridge, there were food items left behind. Very rotten food items. Opening that fridge was like getting smacked in the face with the smell of death. After checking the whole first floor, we went down to the basement. The basement, like the first floor, was still completely furnished, although down here was a lot messier. There were a ton of things like loose sheets of paper and garbage spread out on the floor. The carpet was a faded blue color. There was a little bit of light that came into the room through the windows at the top of the walls. And then we heard a noise from upstairs. A distinct thump. We both just froze like statues, waiting for any kind of noise again. Within a few seconds, we chalked it up to just being a noise of an old, deteriorating house. There wasn't much else to see in the basement, so we went back up to the first floor, and the only place left to check was the upstairs. At the top of the stairs, from what I remember, was the bathroom directly in front of the stairs, and then to the left was a small hallway that led to an open door, and then the hallway cut left. I don't remember what was to the right, but I'll tell you why in a second. Seb and I went left and into the first doorway. It was a bedroom. A decently sized bedroom, but it didn't seem like the master bedroom. There was a double bed in there and an antique-looking dresser. There were some old articles of clothing left behind in the dresser, nothing I wanted to touch. Seb left the room first, and then he said my name in a very concerned, scared-sounding tone. I looked up at him, and he was looking down the hall. I stepped into the hall and saw what he was looking at. There was that woman from earlier, standing in front of the bed in another bedroom at the end of the short hallway. She was still smiling like before. She opened her mouth and said, "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" My brother screamed, "Fuck you," and he pushed me to start running. We both made a beeline for the front door and sprinted to the outside. I couldn't help but look back at the house at the upstairs windows, expecting her to be at one of them, but she wasn't. I also just had to make sure she wasn't chasing after us. We kept running until we were out of sight from the house, and then we kept running some more, even though my cardio sucked and I was out of breath. When we finally made it back to the car, I gagged, trying to throw up from exhaustion. We got in the car and Seb drove us home. The whole ride, we couldn't stop theorizing what it was that just happened. We said it might have been some loony woman off her meds or escaped from a mental facility or something. Maybe she was living in that abandoned house. But even explaining all of that away, the big question is, what did she have behind her back? And was she holding it that whole time she was walking behind us? So many questions that will never be answered.